Mysticism is an evasion of responsibility, and so is passive faith in science. There is no alternative to action, and that requires faith. The issue is, how are we to mold ourselves a belief system that is worthy of life? These were some of the concluding thoughts of young Kamal, hero of Naguib Mahfouz's monumental Cairo trilogy. In it, he explored the social evolution of his native Egypt from the First World War up until the eve of its 1952 nationalist revolution. But they could just as easily have been uttered by Thomas Mann's Hans Castorp in The Magic Mountain. The German author examined here the various ideologies fighting for Europe's soul on the eve of the Great World War by personifying each of them in one of the characters Hans meets in the alpine resort of Davos, Switzerland, where he spent 7 years to treat his incipient tuberculosis. Mahfouz picks up where Mann left off and applies a similar mode of inquiry into the relationship between the need for active participation of a life well lived and the difficulty of choosing which ideals are true and which are false, since doubt was as much an evasion of responsibility as mysticism or a passive belief in science. Today in Davos, leading personalities gather at the start of every new year to discuss the most pressing issues facing the world over the next 12 months. By focusing mostly on the economic matters, however, they forget that ideas matter and that not all of them are morally equivalent. We live today in an age of ideological relativism, where participatory and authoritarian countries depend on each other for their very survival because of the intricate commercial and financial ties that bind their destinies together. We must find our way through this ideological snowstorm and set our sights on what man called the higher level of consciousness, whose fundamental principle was powerfully summed up by Mahfouz: I believe in life and in people. To truly understand the importance of ideas in global political systems, we must visualize how they position themselves with respect to each other in a worldwide jockeying for primacy. By using the regeneration matrix to examine the world of Jefferson and Lafayette of 2 centuries ago, we can see that the relative positions of the key actors of their time were very similar to those of the main actors of today. As Prime Minister of the world's leading power at the dawn of the 19th century, UK's William Pitt the Younger wanted to preserve the existing international order, although Britain's participatory system of government clashed with the authoritarian ones of most of his allies. His position was very similar to that of the neo-realist politicians in today's developed democracies. They are persuaded that maintaining the UN-led international system of sovereign states is the only way to protect and preserve their citizens' high standard of living, as well as their own power and privileges. US President Thomas Jefferson was initially an ardent supporter of radical change as he fought for liberty on both sides of the Atlantic with his friend Lafayette. Later as president, he supported only the incremental changes necessary to maintain an international order favoring free trade and commerce, where the young USA could best attain its manifest destiny. Liberal internationalists Bill Clinton and Tony Blair held similar views when they led their respective nations at the dawn of the 21st century. Both Jefferson and Pitt opposed the revolutionary terror instigated in France by Maximilien Robespierre as he hijacked the initial attempts led by Lafayette to transform France's absolutist monarchy into a constitutional one. Robespierre personified Europe's first nationalist, authoritarian, revolutionary doctrine, proclaiming its own universality and infallibility. He was the direct precursor of both the Chinese authoritarian nationalist challenge to the current liberal world order and to the Islamists' theocratic, multi-frontal struggle to regain what their various adepts consider to be their rightful leading role in today's globalizing world. Jefferson and Pitt also opposed Napoleon Bonaparte, who viewed France as the world's indispensable nation and deployed his military genius to transform the European system of independent states into a Napoleonic order governed from Paris. He almost achieved his aims, proclaimed himself emperor, and fought to preserve the new continental order against a coalition of both participatory and authoritarian states, unwilling to accept French hegemony and aiming to re-establish a stable balance of power in Europe. Napoleon's position was similar to that of the United States of today, in particular during George W. Bush's presidency. Although President Obama has done his best to downplay his predecessor's view of the United States as the world's indispensable nation, the once dominant global position of the USA is increasingly being challenged not only by his adversaries, but also by its allies. The two diametrically opposed actors of the early 19th century were two aristocrats who both believed in the legitimacy of their sovereigns. The Marquis de Lafayette, who fought for radical democratic change in both North America and Europe, and Prince von Metternich, who dedicated his life to thwarting nationalist movements in Europe and to preserving the power of authoritarian, absolute monarchies. For 4 decades, he steered incremental changes through the workings of a delicate balance of power on the continent designed to allow his multi-ethnic empire, Austria, to play the leading role. Russian President Vladimir Putin today tries to wear Metternich's mantle as he attempts to challenge US hegemony and at the same time hem in China's rising star. His ultimate goal is to re-establish Russia's great power status in a renewed balance of power game, only this time on a global scale. These then are the 6 competing visions of world order that vie for dominance in the early 21st century. UN-centered neorealism, Western-focused neoliberalism, US global hegemony, authoritarian national communist, and theocratic Islamist attempts to radically transform the fundamental principles and values of our world order, and the struggle to recreate a multipolar international society based on a global balance of power between the BRICS countries, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the leading European nations, and the diminished but still influential USA. We saw why the first 3 options are incapable to lead us towards the sustainable and resilient world we desire. The Beijing Consensus, New Caliphate, and Russian-style global balance of power visions all pose dangerous ideological challenges. They must be carefully diffused before they push us over the edge towards war and catagenesis. Putin's claim that Russia has legitimate interests in its near abroad is now, after his Georgia and Ukraine adventures, seen by most for what it actually is: a naked power grab to stoke up the great Russian nationalist fires and ensure his continuing hold on power in Moscow. China, a civilization with its own historical system and secular cycles, until the mid-19th century entirely separate from the Mediterranean Atlantic system we have examined until now, is rejoining the globalizing world order and is determined to reshape it in its own image. But the People's Republic of China is an authoritarian developing country, insecure and vulnerable to internal contestations and environmental disasters that negate both its pretensions for global leadership and its ability to lead the world towards the sustainable and resilient future we seek. We must counter the authoritarian nationalist Moscow balance of power and Beijing consensus projects by stifling their attempt to project military power beyond their borders, by promoting their internal forces of democratization in Russia and China, and by reserving for both their rightful places in the emerging global polycratic system once they adopt participatory, open, and accountable systems of governance. The new caliphate hubris of both theocratic states such as Iran and terrorist networks such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda must be countered by challenging directly their delusionary claims to speak for and represent the world's 1 billion Muslims. Instead, we must assist progressive, participatory, cosmopolitan activists across the Islamic world in their efforts to transcend the confrontational Dar al-Islam, world of Islam, versus Dar al-Harb, world of war vision of the international order advocated by their radical opponents, in favor of a Dar al-Salam, world of peace, regional level of governance, based on the principles of social justice, tolerance, cooperation and respect that lie at the very core of the Islamic faith. To sum up, we must transcend the first three visions of the international order by an internal reform of our Euro-Atlantic political institutions and counter the authoritarian Beijing consensus, Moscow balance of power, and various new caliphate dystopias that threaten the very core of the values and principles we have identified as indispensable to creating a sustainable, resilient world whose ultimate moral purpose is the respect and dignity of every human being. Only if we embrace the twin pillars of Lafayette's Gambit, radical, non-violent, legitimate political change across borders and continents for all nationalities, faiths and cultures, will we mobilize the emerging global civil society into action so that we may one day see our dream of tomorrow's society actually become reality. It is a dream well worth dedicating ourselves to, for as Ben Okri said in his novel The Famished Road, a dream can be the highest point of a life.